I never thought the day would come when the children I raised with trembling hands and sleepless nights would look me in the eye and call me a burden. The word pierced deeper than any knife, cutting through the layers of sacrifices I had wrapped myself in. I had grown old, yes. My hair had turned silver, my hands weaker, my steps slower. But inside me still lived the same woman who once carried them in her arms, who worked 2 jobs to make sure there was food on the table, who sat through nights of fever with a wet cloth pressed to their foreheads. I remember the evening vividly. We were gathered in the living room of the house I had lived in for over 40 years. The house where their first steps echoed across the wooden floor. The house where birthdays were celebrated with laughter, where the walls carried our history like silent witnesses. Yet that evening the air was colder than stone. My son Daniel cleared his throat first. He was always the one to lead when something unpleasant had to be said. His wife sat next to him, lips pressed tight, her eyes darting to the ground. Though I knew she was the one who had fueled the fire. "Mom," he began, his voice rehearsed, "we've been talking, and we feel that things are becoming difficult. You need more care now, more attention, and it's not fair to put all that weight on us." Before I could even respond, my daughter, Clara, interrupted. "You are becoming a burden, Mother. We love you, but this is too much. We have our own lives, our own families. We cannot keep living like this." The word hung in the room like a noose. Burden. My chest tightened. Not from age, but from the cruelty of the children I once believed would stand by me until the end. I felt my heart clench, not because of weakness, but because of betrayal. I looked at them both, my lips trembling, searching for words that could reach them. But my voice was swallowed by the weight of what had been said. Their children, my grandchildren, sat in the corner with their eyes wide, too young to understand but old enough to sense that something terrible was happening. "Is that what I am to you?" I finally asked, my voice shaking but steady enough to cut through the silence. "A burden." Neither of them met my eyes. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, and Clara bit her lip as though the word had already turned sour in her mouth, yet she refused to take it back. That night I did not sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the moonlight spilling across the floorboards, replaying the moment again and again in my mind. The children I had given my youth to had reduced me to a weight, a responsibility they wished to shed. I realized then that age does not break a woman, betrayal does. But in that silence, in that darkness, something else awoke inside me. If they thought I was weak, if they thought I was powerless, they had forgotten the woman who had survived storms long before they were even born. They had forgotten the fire that still burned inside me, quietly waiting. The following morning, Clara knocked at my door. She entered without waiting for permission, as though I were no longer the mistress of my own home. She began to explain arrangements, how they had found a nice place for me, a facility where people like me could be taken care of. Her words were knives dressed as kindness. Every sentence dripped with pretense. She spoke of safety, of medical help, of companionship, but I could see the relief hiding behind her eyes. She wanted me gone. She wanted the house, the freedom, the absence of responsibility. I listened without interruption, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my heart beating with a steadiness that would have frightened her if she had known what thoughts were running beneath the calm surface. I was no longer going to cry. I was no longer going to beg. I was planning. When she finally left the room, satisfied with her rehearsed speech, I opened the drawer of my nightstand. Inside lay a set of keys, papers, and an old journal filled with memories of years gone by. But among those memories were also records, documents, and plans that my children had no idea existed. For decades I had been careful, not only in raising them but in securing my own future. I had made choices that ensured I would never truly be at anyone's mercy. They thought I was fragile, that I had no defense, that my fate was in their hands. They could not have been more wrong. That day I decided something they would never expect. If they saw me as a burden, then I would show them the weight of underestimating me. My mind was no longer clouded by sorrow, but sharpened by betrayal. The fire inside me burned hotter than ever. In the days that followed, I played the role they expected. I nodded quietly when they discussed the facility. I pretended to consider their suggestions. I even smiled faintly when they described how peaceful my new life would be away from them. What they did not know was that every smile concealed the gears of my plan turning with precision. I watched them, studied them. Daniel grew more impatient, his wife whispering in his ear with venom disguised as concern. Clara was more brazen, her words sharper, her demands clearer. She wanted control. She wanted possession. But I kept silent, letting them believe I was yielding. At night, when the house was quiet and their families had gone home, I would walk through the rooms slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the memories embedded in every corner. This was my home. I had built it brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. They might have called me a burden, but they would never take this from me. The moment that sealed my resolve came one evening, when I overheard them speaking in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep, but their voices carried through the thin walls. "She will be out soon," Clara whispered sharply. "Then we can finally decide what to do with this place. It's too big, too expensive to maintain. Selling it would be the best option." Daniel hesitated, but his wife interjected, "It's for the best. You know it. She will not be around forever, and we need to think about our future. This house is wasted on her." The words turned my blood cold. They were not just pushing me aside, they were plotting to erase everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed for. That night, I sat at my desk with a pen in hand, and I began writing. Not in my journal, but in documents they did not know existed. Plans they would never anticipate, decisions that would change the course of their lives forever. I was no one's burden. I was the architect of their future, whether they realized it or not. And they would soon discover that the woman they thought they could cast aside was the same woman who had the power to decide their fate. The plan was only beginning. The morning after I made my silent decision, the house felt different to me. It was no longer a place where I would let myself be diminished. It was my stage, and every step, every breath, every glance would be calculated. My children thought they had stripped me of power, but they did not realize I was crafting a plan that would shake the ground beneath them. Daniel came by first. He always carried himself with an air of responsibility, as though his words were final, but I could see the cracks forming in his mask. His eyes avoided mine, his shoulders stiff. He was ashamed, though not enough to take back his words. Shame had never stopped him before. "Mom," he said as he stepped into the kitchen, "I hope you are doing okay. Clara told me you are considering the facility. That's good. It's the right thing for everyone." I stirred the tea in my cup, the spoon clinking against the porcelain. My face remained calm, unreadable. "I am considering it," I replied softly. He nodded quickly, relief flashing across his face. He wanted me to agree, to submit, to make his betrayal easier to swallow. I let him believe it. The more comfortable they grew, the less they would expect when the truth revealed itself. Later that day, Clara arrived. She was not subtle like her brother. She walked into my room as though she owned it, her perfume filling the air before her words even began. She smiled, but it was not kindness, it was triumph. "I've spoken to the manager of the facility," she said, placing a folder on the table. "They have a room available next week. It's lovely, Mother. You will be well taken care of there." I glanced at the folder but did not open it. "Next week?" I asked, my voice steady. "Yes," she answered, her smile widening. "It is all arranged. You only need to sign the paperwork. Daniel and I will handle the rest." I nodded slowly, my fingers resting lightly on the edge of the folder. She mistook my silence for surrender. She mistook my composure for weakness. But inside, I was already 10 steps ahead. That evening, when the house grew quiet and I was alone again, I retrieved my journal. Not the sentimental one filled with memories, but the leather-bound book where I had kept records, notes, and instructions. I turned the pages slowly, reviewing the plans I had set in motion years ago, long before my children decided I was a burden. I had savings tucked away in accounts they knew nothing about. I had legal papers drafted that secured this house in ways they would never anticipate. I had allies, old friends, trusted confidants who would stand with me when the time came. I had never planned to use these measures, but betrayal has a way of waking the dormant strength within a woman. The next day I called my lawyer, a man I had known since Daniel was a boy. His voice on the other end of the line was steady and familiar. "I was wondering when you might call," he said. "I always told you to be prepared for the day when your children might forget their roots." "They already have," I replied. "And now I must act." We arranged to meet privately, away from prying eyes. I knew Clara and Daniel would begin watching me more closely, so I had to be careful. Every movement had to appear natural, every word calculated. Days passed, and the facade I wore became second nature. I allowed Clara to speak of the facility as though it were my destiny. I let Daniel believe his decision was noble. I even let the grandchildren kiss me goodbye at night without sensing the storm that brewed behind my gentle smile. But behind closed doors, I wrote letters, I signed papers, I set wheels in motion that would alter everything. Each document I signed was another piece of armor, another shield against their betrayal. The breaking point came when Clara returned one evening with her husband. He was a tall man with cold eyes, the kind of man who measured everything in terms of profit and gain. I had never trusted him, and now I understood why. Mava, Clara began, her voice sugary sweet. We have been talking about the house. It is far too large for you, and maintaining it is becoming difficult. Once you are comfortable in the facility, we can put this place to good use. Perhaps we will sell it, or maybe renovate. It will benefit everyone. Her husband nodded, adding, it's a logical decision. You will be happier without the stress of property. Leave that to us. My heart pounded in my chest, but my face revealed nothing. I smiled faintly and said, you may be right. It is a big house. Clara beamed, believing she had already won. Her husband's smirk made me want to tear the ground from under his feet. But I stayed calm. They had no idea that the fate of this house was already sealed, and not in their favor. That night I returned to my desk. I took out the most important document of all, a letter of instruction I had written years ago, but never signed. With careful precision, I signed my name. The ink dried slowly under the dim light, sealing my decision. My children would never own this house. They would never profit from my sacrifices. The house would go to someone worthy, someone who understood what it represented. I would not let their greed erase my legacy. The following morning, I rose early. I walked through the garden, the flowers swaying gently in the wind, the sun casting its first golden rays over the earth. This was my sanctuary, my proof that beauty could be grown from toil. No one was going to take it from me. As I returned inside, I heard Daniel's voice from the kitchen. He was speaking with Clara, their words hushed but urgent. She seems ready to go, Daniel said. We should finalize everything before she changes her mind. She won't, Clara replied with confidence. She is too tired, too old. This is already done. I stepped into the room, my face serene. They froze for a moment, guilt flashing across their features. But I simply poured myself a glass of water and said, you are right. I am tired. But sometimes being tired gives a person clarity. They exchanged a glance, but said nothing. I walked away, leaving them to their schemes. They thought they were winning. They thought I was surrendering, but the truth was far more dangerous for them. That night I sat in my room once again, my journal open before me, and I wrote one simple sentence at the bottom of the page. They will learn that a burden carries weight, and sometimes that weight crushes those who misjudge it. The plan was unfolding, and the silence I wore was my sharpest weapon. The more silent I became, the more careless my children grew. They mistook my quiet acceptance for surrender, unaware that my silence was a veil, a shield, a mask for the storm building beneath. Every word they spoke, every look they exchanged, I absorbed like a sponge. Their whispers became my ammunition, their greed my fuel. One evening, Clara came again, this time without her children. She sat across from me in the living room, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp. She had prepared herself for this conversation, and I knew before she opened her mouth that it would be crueler than the last. Mother, she began, we need to be realistic. This cannot go on. You are struggling, and we cannot keep pretending everything is fine. You will be moved next week. Daniel and I have already decided. Her words were not a suggestion, they were a declaration. I sipped my tea slowly, allowing the silence to stretch between us. Finally, I spoke. You have already decided. Then what need is there for me in this conversation? Clara's face hardened. Because you need to understand this is for your own good. We are not monsters. We are doing what is necessary. I set my cup down gently. You call it necessary. I call it betrayal. Her eyes flickered, but she did not back down. You will thank us one day. I smiled, but not the way she expected. It was the kind of smile that hides secrets, the kind that unsettles the confident. She shifted in her seat, uneasy. She had always been bold, but she was not used to being challenged by silence that carried power. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I heard voices through the thin walls. Daniel had joined her, and their discussion was heated. She is stubborn, Clara hissed, but it does not matter. Once she is in the facility, the house will be ours. The paperwork is simple. Daniel sounded hesitant. Are you sure we should do this? It feels wrong. His wife's voice cut through his doubt. Do not be weak. This is our chance. Think of the children. Think of our future. She will not live forever. Better to settle everything now. The sound of betrayal in my own house stung, but it also strengthened me. They were no longer just children making selfish decisions. They had become conspirators, plotting against me, and that required a different kind of response. The following day, I dressed carefully and went into town. I met with my lawyer in a small office above a bookshop where no one would think to look. For me, he greeted me warmly, and I handed him the signed documents. It is done then? He asked. Yes, I said firmly. They believe they are sending me away. But when the time comes, they will learn who truly holds the reins. He reviewed the papers, nodding with approval. You are wise to act now. Betrayal from family cuts the deepest, but preparation is the sharpest revenge. When I returned home, Clara noticed the faint smell of the outside world on me. She frowned, suspicious. Where did you go today, Mother? I smiled calmly. Just for a walk. The air was nice. She studied me for a long moment before shrugging. She had no idea the walk had been the first step in dismantling her plans. The days crawled forward, each one bringing me closer to the moment of confrontation. The house seemed heavier with tension, the walls listening to every word, the air charged with unspoken conflict. I went about my routines with deliberate calm, cooking my meals, tending to the garden, writing in my journal. To them, it looked like the slow decline of an aging woman. In truth, it was the careful preparation of a soldier before battle. One evening Daniel came alone. He looked tired, his face drawn, his voice softer than Clara's. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands fidgeting. Mom, he said, I do not want you to think we hate you. That is not what this is. We just want what is best for everyone. Asterisk, I looked into his eyes and asked, is betrayal what is best for everyone? Daniel, selling the house your father built, casting aside the mother who raised you. He flinched at my words. It is not betrayal. It is practicality. I leaned closer, my voice calm but edged with steel. Practicality is a mask for greed. Do not fool yourself. You may convince Clara, you may convince your wife, but you cannot convince me. I know the difference. He opened his mouth to speak, but closed it again, unable to find words. He stood abruptly, muttered something about having to go, and left. I watched him from the window as he walked to his car, his shoulders heavy, his steps unsteady. There was still a fragment of the boy I had raised in him, but it was buried under layers of weakness and manipulation. That night I sat in the living room with the lights off, listening to the sounds of the house. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows reminded me of the years I had lived within these walls. They thought they could erase me, but they did not understand that my roots were too deep to be torn away. The next morning, Clara arrived with papers in hand. She placed them in front of me on the table. These are the forms, Mother. Sign them, and everything will be arranged. The facility is waiting. I looked down at the papers, then up at her face. She smiled confidently, believing she had cornered me. I picked up the pen, held it for a moment, and then set it back down. Asterisk, I will think about it, I said calmly. Her smile faltered. What is there to think about? I met her gaze directly. Everything. She gathered the papers with frustration and left, slamming the door behind her. I remained seated, my heartbeat steady. She believed the game was nearly over, but the truth was that it had only just begun. That evening, I wrote another line in my journal. They see a burden, I see an empire. And empires are not surrendered, they are defended. The shadows in the room seemed to nod in agreement. The plan was moving forward, and the moment of revelation was drawing near. The air inside the house grew heavier with every passing day. Clara and Daniel believed they were closing in on their victory, yet the truth was that they were weaving their own downfall. I wore my silence like a cloak, moving through the rooms with deliberate calm, never letting them see the storm waiting just beneath my skin. On Sunday afternoon, Clara brought her children over. Their laughter echoed through the house, a sharp contrast to the bitterness brewing among the adults. Baked cookies with them, listened to their stories about school, and for a moment I let myself feel the warmth of family. But in the corner of my mind, I never forgot that their mother was plotting against me, teaching them with her silence that betrayal was acceptable if dressed as practicality. Later, when the children were in the yard, Clara turned to me. Mother, you should not tire yourself with all this. Soon you will be comfortable in a place where you will not need to cook, clean, or worry about anything." Her tone carried the same sweetness it always did, a sweetness I knew was poisoned. I smiled gently, hiding the sharpness of my thoughts. "Perhaps you are right," I said. She mistook my words as surrender. She always did. That night, after they had gone, I walked through the empty halls. My footsteps echoed softly against the wooden floors, the same floors where my children once played, where they laughed and cried, where I once dreamed of a future filled with love and respect. The betrayal weighed on me, but it did not crush me. It shaped me. I stopped in front of the old cabinet in the living room. Inside, among photo albums and heirlooms, was a locked box. I pulled it out and carried it to my room. The key hung from a chain I had worn for decades, hidden beneath my clothes. When I opened the box, the scent of old paper rose into the air. Inside were documents my children had no idea existed. Property deeds, bank statements, and letters sealed in envelopes. Each one was a piece of the puzzle they could never solve. Each one a shield against their greed. I placed my hand on the top of the stack and whispered to myself, "This is my legacy, and it will not be stolen." The following day I met with my lawyer again. He was meticulous, reading every page twice, ensuring that every clause and signature was perfect. "They will try to challenge this," he warned me. "Children often do when they realize they have been cut out." "Let them try," I said firmly. "They are not as clever as they think they are." When I returned home, Daniel was waiting in the driveway. His face was drawn with concern, though I knew it was not concern for me but for the plan slipping through his fingers. "Mom, where have you been?" he asked quickly. "Out," I replied calmly. He frowned. "You should not be out alone. You could get hurt." I met his eyes, unflinching. "I have been alone for years. Daniel, do not act like you care now." He winced at my words but said nothing. Guilt gnawed at him. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, in the way he could not hold my gaze. Yet guilt without action is nothing but cowardice, and I had no patience for cowards. That evening Clara returned once again, this time more forceful than ever. She placed the facility paperwork on the table and pushed it toward me. "Sign it, Mother," she demanded. "This has gone on long enough. You are making this harder than it needs to be." I looked at her calmly, my hands resting on the table. "Harder, for who?" I asked softly. Her lips tightened. "For all of us. Stop being stubborn. It is time." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. "And what of this house? What happens to it once I am gone?" She hesitated for only a moment before replying, "We will take care of it. Do not worry." The lie was sharp and immediate. She had no intention of caring for it. She wanted to sell it, to erase the years of sacrifice etched into its walls. I picked up the pen, held it in my hand for a long moment, and then placed it back down without signing. "I will think about it," I said again. Clara's face reddened with frustration. "You cannot keep delaying this forever." I met her gaze with calm steel. "I can, and I will." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard, the frames on the walls rattled. I remained seated, my heartbeat steady, my mind clear. She thought I was being difficult out of fear, but she did not understand that my refusal was born from strength. The next morning I received a phone call from an old friend, Margaret, a woman who had stood by me through years of struggle. I told her what was happening, and her voice trembled with outrage. "They called you a burden, after everything you gave them." "Yes," I said quietly, "you cannot let them do this. You are stronger than they think." Her words were a balm to my heart, a reminder that I was not entirely alone. And though my children had turned their backs on me, there were still those who saw me for who I truly was. That evening I sat by the window, the moonlight spilling across my lap, and I wrote another line in my journal. "They have underestimated me. That will be their greatest mistake." 2 days later, Clara returned again, this time with her husband and Daniel. They all sat across from me in the living room, their faces set with determination. "Mother," Clara began, "this is the last time we will ask. Sign the papers. This is happening whether you like it or not." Daniel nodded, though his eyes betrayed his hesitation. His wife's expression was harder, colder, dripping with greed. I folded my hands in my lap and looked at each of them in turn. "You believe you have control. You believe you can decide my fate, but you are wrong. This is my house, my life, my legacy. And when the time comes, You will learn what it means to underestimate me." They exchanged uneasy glances, confused by the confidence in my voice. Clara tried to laugh it off. "You are being dramatic, Mother. This is for your own good." I stood slowly, my back straight, my voice unwavering. "No, Clara, this is for your good. You call me a burden, but I am the weight that holds this family together. Without me, everything you think you are building will crumble." The room fell silent. Even Daniel looked unsettled. Clara's husband shifted in his seat, muttering something under his breath. Finally, Clara stood, her face pale with anger. "We will see about that," she hissed before storming out. Daniel lingered, for a moment, his eyes on me. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, and followed his sister. I remained in the living room, my heart steady, my resolve stronger than ever. They thought they had cornered me, but they had only pushed me into a place where I could strike back with precision. That night, as I closed my journal, I whispered to myself, "They have called me a burden. Soon they will understand what a burden truly is." The game was no longer hidden. The war had begun. The house felt different after that confrontation. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breaths, waiting for the next blow. I moved through the rooms with deliberate calm, yet inside I was sharper than ever. My children thought they had tightened the noose around me, but what they did not realize was that they had only given me more time to prepare. For days after their ultimatum, I did not see Clara or Daniel. They had retreated, perhaps to strategize, perhaps to lick their wounds after my refusal. But absence did not mean safety. I knew they were moving behind the scenes, making phone calls, contacting lawyers, searching for ways to force my hand. They underestimated me, but I would not underestimate them. During those quiet days, I began making calls of my own. Margaret connected me with an old acquaintance of hers, a man who specialized in uncovering hidden truths. His name was Thomas, and he met me in a cafe on the edge of town. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority. "You said you needed information," he said as he stirred his coffee. "Yes," I replied. "My children believe I am weak. They believe they can take everything from me. I want to know just how far they have gone in their scheming." He studied me for a moment before nodding. "I will find out." Within a week, Thomas returned with documents, emails, and copies of property listings. Clara and Daniel had already contacted real estate agents. They were preparing to sell the house before I had even left it. The audacity made my blood boil, but it also gave me clarity. They were not just selfish, they were ruthless. I spread the papers across my kitchen table, the proof of betrayal staring back at me in black ink. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with resolve. That evening, I called my lawyer again. When he answered, I said only one thing. "It is time to move to the next step." The following day, Clara arrived at the house unannounced. She carried herself with an air of triumph, her smile wide and artificial. "Mother," she said brightly, "I have wonderful news. We have found the perfect place for you. Spacious, well-staffed, and close enough for us to visit often." I raised an eyebrow. "And who will pay for this place?" She hesitated for only a moment. "Do not worry about that. We will handle everything once the house is sold." Her words dripped with arrogance. I forced myself to remain calm, my expression unreadable. "I see," I said quietly. She mistook my calmness for surrender, the same mistake she had made before. She left the house humming to herself, completely unaware that every step she took was leading her closer to the trap I was setting. Later that night, Daniel returned. Unlike Clara, he did not bother with false cheer. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his shoulders hunched, his eyes filled with unease. "Mom," he said quietly, "Clara thinks you are being unreasonable. She says you are only making this harder. "And what do you think?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "I do not know. Maybe she is right. Maybe this is what is best." I leaned forward, my voice steady and calm. "Do you remember when you were a boy, Daniel? Do you remember the nights I stayed awake with you when you were sick? The mornings I worked double shifts so you could have what you needed? Was that unreasonable? Was that a burden?" His eyes filled with shame, but he did not answer. He simply stood and left, unable to face the weight of his own silence. When the door closed behind him, I whispered to myself, "Coward." Days passed, and the tension grew thicker. The phone rang off in real estate agents, facility managers, lawyers, but I let most of the calls go unanswered. Clara grew more frustrated with each visit, her voice sharper, her words crueler. She accused me of being selfish, of clinging to the past, of making everything more difficult than it needed to be. You cannot stop this, Mother, she snapped one evening. We are trying to help you, but if you refuse to cooperate, then we will do what must be done without your consent. I looked at her calmly and said, Try. Her face flushed with anger. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. That night, I opened my journal once more and wrote, They believe they are closing in. They cannot see the cracks forming beneath their own feet. The next morning, Thomas returned with new information. Clara had been speaking with a man named Victor, a wealthy developer who had expressed interest in purchasing the house. He was ruthless in business, known for tearing down old homes to replace them with sterile apartments. Clara had promised him a quick deal once I was out of the way. I clenched the papers in my hands, fury burning in my chest. They were not just planning to take my home. They were planning to erase it, erase the memories, the history, the sacrifices that had been poured into its walls. Then it is settled, I said to Thomas. I will not wait any longer. It is time they see what I have planned. That evening, I invited Daniel and Clara to dinner. They were suspicious, but accepted, believing it was a sign that I was finally giving in. I cooked a meal with care, the kind I had made for them when they were children. Roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables, seasoned the way they liked, and apple pie for desserts. When they arrived, the air was thick with false pleasantries. Clara smiled too brightly. Daniel avoided my gaze. We ate in near silence, the sound of cutlery against plates filling the room. After dessert, I stood and placed a folder on the table. I have something to show you, I said. Clara leaned forward, eagerly, certain it was the paperwork she had been waiting for. Daniel watched quietly, his expression tense. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. These are my final decisions. The house, the bank accounts, the assets, everything has been secured. Nothing can be taken without my consent. And when the time comes, you will find that you have been left with nothing. Clara's face drained of color. What is this? She whispered. This, I said firmly, is what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. Daniel looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing without words. Clara, however, erupted with rage. You cannot do this, she shouted. We are your children. You owe us. I stood tall, my voice unwavering. I owe you nothing. I gave you life. I gave you everything I could. And this is how you repay me, by calling me a burden, by plotting to sell my home behind my back. No, Clara, you owe me. The room was silent, except for the sound of her ragged breathing. Daniel's eyes darted between us, torn between loyalty and guilt. Finally, Clara pushed back her chair violently and stood. This is not over, she hissed before storming out of the house. Daniel lingered, his eyes heavy with conflict. Mom, he said softly, why are you doing this? I met his gaze, unflinching, because you forced me to. One day you will understand. He left without another word. That night, I wrote in my journal, the first crack has formed. Soon, everything they have built on their greed will collapse. The storm was no longer distant. It was here, brewing in the heart of my home, and it would not be long before it consumed everything. The silence that followed Clara's outburst was deceptive. For 2 days the house was quiet. No visits, no phone calls, no demands. I knew better than to believe it was over. Silence was her strategy, a way to regroup, to gather strength for her next strike. She was not the kind of woman who accepted defeat, even when the truth stared her in the face. During those 2 days, I found myself restless. I walked the length of the house, running my hand along the banisters, touching the frames on the walls, pausing at the kitchen doorway where my children once tumbled in with muddy shoes and wide smiles. The memories brought both warmth and sorrow, for the children in those memories were gone, replaced by strangers hardened by greed. On the 3rd day, Clara returned. She did not come alone. She arrived with her husband and 2 sharply dressed strangers who introduced themselves as representatives of a senior care facility. They spoke in rehearsed tones, describing amenities, staff qualifications, medical care. Their smiles were smooth, professional, and suffocating. Clara watched me closely as the men spoke, her eyes sharp, waiting for me to falter. I listened politely, nodding occasionally, my face betraying nothing. When they finished their pitch, Clara clasped her hands together. Mother, she said sweetly, this is exactly what you need. Safe, comfortable, and no more stress. We can arrange the transfer immediately. I folded my hands in my lap. I will think about it, I replied, my voice calm and steady. Clara's smile flickered, but she recovered quickly. Of course, but do not take too long. Spaces filled quickly. The representatives left soon after, leaving behind glossy brochures filled with images of sterile hallways and forced smiles. Clara lingered, certain that her show of power had shaken me. When she finally departed, I picked up the brochures, tore them into pieces, and tossed them into the fire. That evening, I called Thomas. His voice was firm when he answered. They are moving faster, I said. Then we move faster too, he replied. We arranged to meet the next day. In his office, surrounded by files and photographs, he laid out everything he had discovered. Clara and her husband were in deep financial trouble. Credit card debt, unpaid loans, risky investments. The plan to sell my house was not just about convenience, it was about survival. They need your house to cover their mistakes, Thomas said. Without it, they are ruined. The revelation cut deep, but it also steeled my resolve. My children had not just betrayed me out of cold ambition, they had done it out of desperation. They were willing to sacrifice me to save themselves. Will not be their sacrifice, I whispered. Thomas leaned back in his chair. What do you want me to do next? Find out how far they are willing to go, I said. And be ready when they go too far. When I returned home, the weight of truth pressed heavily on me, but it did not crush me. It gave me purpose. I began writing letters to friends, to charities, to organizations I trusted. I outlined my wishes clearly, leaving nothing open to interpretation. If Clara or Daniel tried to challenge me, they would find themselves facing more than just my words. They would face an entire network ready to defend my choices. Days passed, and the tension thickened once more. Daniel returned one evening, his face drawn and weary. He sat across from me, fidgeting with his hands. Mom, he said, his voice low, Clara is angry. She says, you are making everything harder than it needs to be. And what do you say? I asked, my eyes locked on his dot. He hesitated before answering. I think maybe she is going too far. But she believes this is best. I leaned forward. Do you believe it is best, Daniel? Or do you believe it is easiest? He flinched at my words, unable to answer. I do not know anymore, he admitted finally. Then let me tell you, I said firmly. This is not best. This is betrayal. You are my son. You know what I have given, what I have sacrificed. Do not let her drag you into her greed. Choose wisely, Daniel. One day soon, you will have to. He left without replying, his shoulders heavy with conflict. That night, I sat by the window, the moon casting its silver light across the room. I thought about the boy he once was, gentle and eager to please, and I wondered when exactly that boy had been replaced by the man who now stood in my kitchen, torn between loyalty and weakness. The next morning brought another blow. A letter arrived from a law office, informing me that Clara and Daniel had begun proceedings to gain guardianship over me. Guardianship, the legal authority to make decisions on my behalf, to control my finances, my home, my very life. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. They were not waiting for my consent anymore. They were trying to strip me of my voice entirely. For a moment, fear threatened to break through my resolve. Guardianship was a heavy weapon, and if granted, it would give them the power they craved. But as I sat there, the fear transformed into something stronger. Determination. They had made their move. Now it was time for mine. That evening, I called my lawyer once more. I explained everything, handed him the letter, and together we began preparing a counterattack. We would contest their claim, present evidence of my clarity, my independence, my ability to make decisions, and we would expose their motives for what they truly were. But I did not stop there. With Thomas's help, I began gathering documents, proof of their debts, their lies, their desperation. If they wanted a battle, then I would give them one they could never win. 2 nights later, Clara arrived again, her anger barely contained. She waved the letter in front of me, her voice sharp and cold. You should have signed when you had the chance, she hissed. Now, we will make the decisions for you. I rose slowly, meeting her gaze with unflinching calm. You may try, Clara, but you will fail. Her face twisted with fury. You think you can stop us. You are old, alone, and weak. You cannot fight us. I stepped closer, my voice steady as stone. I am not weak. I am prepared. And when the truth comes out, you will see just how wrong you are." She recoiled at the certainty in my voice, for she knew I was not bluffing. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. When the house fell silent once more, I sat at my desk and wrote in my journal, "The tide is turning. They believe they have won, but they have only sealed their own defeat. Soon, their empire of lies will crumble." The storm was no longer distant. It was here, surrounding us all, and there would be no escaping its fury. The summons arrived on a gray morning, a heavy envelope with my name typed neatly on the front. Inside was the official notice. A hearing had been scheduled to determine my guardianship. Clara and Daniel had filed their petition. The date was set for 2 weeks' time. I sat at the kitchen table with the paper in front of me, the silence of the house pressing in on all sides. 2 weeks, that was how long I had to prepare, how long I had to gather every shred of proof, every ounce of strength. I called my lawyer immediately. His voice was steady, reassuring. "We will fight this," he said. "I will bring witnesses, medical evaluations, testimony of your independence. We will show them that you are of sound mind and capable of managing your life." "I want more than that," I told him firmly. "I want them exposed. I want their motives laid bare for the court to see." "Then, we will do exactly that," he replied. The next days passed in a blur of preparation. I visited doctors who examined me thoroughly and confirmed that my mind was sharp, my health stable. Friends came forward, ready to testify on my behalf, ready to speak of my clarity and independence. Thomas gathered evidence of Clara and Daniel's financial ruin, documents that painted a damning picture of desperation and greed. At night, I wrote in my journal, the ink scratching across the pages as I poured out my resolve. "They want to silence me," I wrote, "but in doing so, they have given me a stage. In that courtroom, the truth will be my weapon." When the day arrived, I dressed with care, a dark dress, simple and dignified, a coat that had belonged to my mother, a reminder of the strength of the women who came before me. As I stood before the mirror, I whispered to myself, "They will not take me." The courthouse was a cold building of stone and glass. Clara and Daniel stood at the opposite end of the hall, their expressions smug, their lawyer at their side. Clara's eyes gleamed with false pity as she approached me. "Mother," she said sweetly, "this is for your own good. You will see that soon enough." I looked her squarely in the eyes. "I see clearly, Clara, and soon, so will everyone else." Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. The judge sat high above, her expression unreadable. Lawyers shuffled papers, whispered arguments, adjusted their glasses. I sat calmly, my lawyer at my side, Thomas seated behind us, with a folder full of damning truths. Clara's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of an old woman, too fragile, too confused, too incapable of managing her own life. He spoke of risks, of dangers, of the burden of responsibility. Clara nodded along, her expression one of rehearsed concern. Daniel sat stiffly, his guilt evident in the way he avoided my gaze. When it was my lawyer's turn, he stood tall and confident. He called witnesses who spoke of my independence, my clarity, my ability to make decisions. He presented medical evaluations that confirmed my mind was sharp, and then he turned the focus where it truly belonged, on Clara and Daniel. Thomas stepped forward with documents that told a story far different from the one Clara had crafted. Bank statements showing mounting debt, records of unpaid loans, correspondence with real estate agents, proof of their attempts to sell my home without my knowledge, and finally, the emails to the developer, promising a quick sale once I was out of the way. The courtroom fell silent as the weight of the evidence settled over everyone. Clara's face flushed red, her composure cracking. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his shame plain to see. I sat quietly, my hands folded, my heart steady. The judge turned her gaze on Clara. "Do you have a response to these allegations?" Clara stammered, her words stumbling over themselves. "This is not what it looks like. We were only trying to protect her. We wanted what was best." The judge's expression hardened. "It appears what you wanted was her property, not her well-being." Clara fell silent, her confidence shattered. Daniel rose, his voice shaking. "I did not know it had gone this far," he said. "I only thought we were helping." The judge looked at him with a mixture of pity and disdain before turning her attention back to me. "You have the right to speak," she said. I stood slowly, my voice clear and strong as it carried through the room. "I am not a burden. I am not weak. I have lived my life with dignity, and I will not allow that to be stolen from me by those who mistake greed for care. I raised my children to be honest, to be kind, to be strong, and what have they become? A daughter who schemes, a son who hides behind silence. If they wish to save themselves, they may do so, but not at my expense, not with my home, not with my life. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. For the first time, Clara looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The judge ruled swiftly. The petition for guardianship was denied. Clara and Daniel had no legal authority over me. My independence was affirmed, my rights intact. Relief washed over me, but it was not complete. This was a battle won, but not the war. As I walked out of the courthouse, Clara followed, her face twisted with fury. "This is not the end," she spat. "You may have won today, but you cannot stop what is coming." I stopped, turned to her, and said firmly, "You are right, Clara. This is not the end. It is only the beginning." Her eyes widened at the certainty in my voice, for she knew I was not speaking in threats, but in truth. That night, I returned home, exhausted but unbroken. I sat at my desk and wrote in my journal once more. The court has spoken. They sought to strip me of my voice, and instead they amplified it. They tried to bury me, and instead they unearthed themselves. But Clara is not finished, and neither am I. The next move will be mine. The storm had moved from the horizon to the very doorstep. Soon, it would rage inside these walls, and when it did, only one side would remain standing. The victory in court was a triumph, but triumph has a way of provoking desperation in those who lose. Clara had worn her fury openly as we left the courthouse, and I knew she would not lick her wounds quietly. Pride and greed burned too hot within her to accept defeat. The days that followed were uneasy. I kept to my routines, cooking meals, tending to the garden, writing in my journal, but the air carried a weight that never lifted. At night, I double-checked the locks, listening for sounds in the dark that did not belong. I was not afraid, but I was alert. Thomas came by often, sitting across from me at the kitchen table with his steady gaze. "She will not stop," he said. "The question is how far she is willing to go." "I intend to find out," I replied. The answer came sooner than either of us expected. 3 nights after the hearing, I was woken by the acrid scent of smoke. My eyes shot open, and for a moment I thought it was a dream. Then I saw the faint glow seeping through the crack beneath my bedroom door. My heart pounded. I sprang from bed, grabbed the phone, and called emergency services. Then I opened the door and was met with a thin veil of smoke curling through the hallway. I moved quickly, pulling the fire extinguisher from the wall and rushing toward the source. The kitchen curtains were aflame, tongues of fire licking the cabinets above. I sprayed the extinguisher until the fire sputtered and died, leaving behind blackened fabric and charred wood. The fire crew arrived minutes later, their lights flashing against the windows. They examined the scene carefully, their faces grave. "This was no accident," one of them said. "The fire started from an accelerant on the curtains. Someone wanted this to spread fast." My stomach turned, though I felt no surprise. Clara's fury had found a new outlet. I spent that night at Thomas's house, the smell of smoke still clinging to my clothes. As we sat in his living room, he said what I already knew. "She tried to burn you out. You need to press charges." I shook my head slowly. "Not yet. If I move too soon, she will slip through my fingers. Let her think I am rattled. Let her think I am retreating. She will overplay her hand." The next morning, I returned home. The damage was confined to the kitchen, but the message was clear. Clara wanted me gone, and she was running out of patience. 2 days later, she arrived unannounced. Her smile was brittle, her eyes glittering with false innocence. "I heard about the fire," she said lightly. "How terrible. Are you sure it was not something you left on the stove?" I looked at her calmly, refusing to give her the satisfaction of anger. "The investigators said it was deliberate. Her smile faltered, then returned sharper than before. "Well, I am glad you are safe. But you see how dangerous it is for you to stay here alone. Maybe now you will reconsider." I folded my arms. "No, Clara. If anything, I see more clearly than ever. This house is my home, and I will not leave it." Her mask slipped then, just for a moment. I saw the flash of rage beneath the surface, raw and ugly. She leaned closer, her voice low and venomous. "You think you are clever, but you are old, and time is not on your side. One way or another, this house will be mine. She turned sharply and left, her heels clicking against the floor like gunshots. When the door closed, I allowed myself a long breath. She had shown her hand, dropped the mask she had worn so carefully. There was no more pretense of concern, no more talk of care, only greed laid bare. That night, I wrote in my journal, "The mask has fallen. She has revealed herself. Now the battle is no longer hidden. It is open, and it will end only one way." In the following days, I set my plan into motion. With Thomas's help, I installed discreet cameras around the house. Every doorway, every window, every hall was under watch. If Clara or anyone else tried again, there would be proof. I also contacted the police quietly, filing a report about the fire, laying a foundation for what was to come. Still, Clara pressed on. She called repeatedly, leaving messages that shifted from pleading to threatening. She came to the house twice more, each time circling like a predator, searching for weakness. Each time, I gave her none. Then Daniel appeared. He came alone, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He sat at the table, his hands trembling as he spoke. "Mother, you have to understand. She is not herself. The debts, the pressure, it has changed her. She is desperate." "And what about you, Daniel?" I asked softly. "What has desperation done to you?" He buried his face in his hands. "I do not know anymore. I wanted to believe we were helping you, but now I see it was never about that. I do not know how to stop her." "You stop her by choosing differently," I said firmly. "You are not bound to her schemes. You still have a choice." He lifted his head, his eyes wet with tears. "I am afraid of her," he whispered. "So am I admitted. But fear is not an excuse for betrayal. It is a call to courage. Find yours, Daniel, before it is too late." He left in silence, and I did not know whether my words had reached him. The tension mounted, day by day, until the air itself seemed to vibrate with it. I felt the storm gathering again, closer than ever. And then, one evening, the storm arrived. I was sitting in the living room when the sound of glass shattering exploded from the back of the house. I rose quickly, my heart steady, my mind clear. The cameras would capture everything, but in that moment, I was not thinking of evidence. I was thinking of survival. Voices echoed in the hall, rough and hurried, Clara's voice among them, sharp and commanding. I moved to the phone, dialing the police with quick, practiced fingers. Then I picked up the heavy lamp from the side table and waited that the footsteps grew louder, closer, until Clara herself stepped into the room. Her face was wild, her eyes blazing with a madness I had never seen before. "This ends tonight," she hissed. Behind her, two men hovered, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They carried bags, tools, burglars brought not for theft, but for destruction. I stood tall, the lamp in my hand. "Yes, Clara," I said, my voice steady. "It does end tonight, but not the way you think." The wail of sirens split the night air, growing louder with each second. Clara's eyes widened, the realization dawning too late. The cameras had recorded everything, the call had been made, and the law was moments away from arriving. Just she turned on me, her fury boiling over. "You think you have won. This is not over." The sirens stopped outside, doors slammed, shouts filled the air. Police flooded the house, their lights blazing, their commands sharp. The hooded men froze, their tools clattering to the floor. Clara screamed as they pulled her back, her protests drowned by the chaos. I lowered the lamp, my hands steady, my heart pounding not with fear but with triumph. As they led her away, her eyes locked on mine, filled with hatred and despair. And in that gaze, I saw the truth. The battle was over. Clara had destroyed herself. That night, as the house grew quiet once more, I sat at my desk and wrote in my journal, "The storm has broken. The mask has fallen. What comes next is not survival, but reckoning." The night of Clara's arrest left the house in a strange silence. The shattered glass had been cleaned, the smoke from the attempted fire had long faded, but the air carried a residue of conflict that no broom could sweep away. I sat in my chair by the window, looking out at the moonlit street where the police cars had once stood. Clara was in custody now, but I knew the storm was not fully past. The next morning, Thomas arrived early, his briefcase in hand, his face grim. "They will charge her," he said as he sat at the kitchen table. "Arson, attempted burglary, conspiracy. The evidence is undeniable. Between the cameras and the police report, Her case is as good as sealed. I nodded. Relief should have washed over me, but it did not. And Daniel? I asked. Thomas leaned back, his eyes heavy with thought. Daniel's involvement is less clear. He was not here the night of the break-in, but he has been complicit in her schemes. The court may still demand answers from him. I closed my eyes briefly. A mother's love is a strange thing. Even after betrayal, even after the attempts to strip me of my dignity, part of me still longed for Daniel to choose a different path. Clara's greed had consumed her completely, but Daniel's guilt had cracked through. Faint though it was. 2 days later, the official papers arrived. Clara was to stand trial. I was listed as the primary witness. My testimony would carry weight, but I knew it would not be easy to face her again. In the quiet hours, I wrote in my journal, "Justice is not revenge. Justice is truth made visible." When I step into that courtroom, I will speak the truth, not only for myself, but for every parent who has been betrayed by those they raised. Before the trial, Daniel came to see me again. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. He sat down heavily, unable to meet my gaze. "Mother," he began, his voice low, "I am sorry." I studied him, waiting. "I knew too much," he continued. "I saw the debts, the lies, the danger. I should have stopped her. I should have walked away. But I did nothing. I let it happen." His hands shook as he spoke. "I do not know if you can forgive me." The silence stretched between us. I thought of the little boy he had once been, his hand in mine, his laughter filling this house. I thought of the man who had stood silent while his sister tried to strip me of everything. Both versions of him were real, and both stood before me now. "I do not know yet if forgiveness is possible," I said quietly. "But I know this. Forgiveness is not a shield from consequence. You will have to face what you allowed." Tears slid down his face. He nodded, unable to argue. "I understand." When the day of Clara's trial arrived, the courthouse was filled with a tense hush. Reporters gathered outside, their cameras flashing as we entered. It had become more than a family conflict. It was now a matter of public record, a spectacle for others to watch. Inside, Clara sat at the defense table. Her once carefully polished image was gone. Her hair hung limp, her face drawn tight with rage and fear. She glanced at me only once, her eyes burning with resentment. The prosecution laid out the case, the arson attempt, the break-in, the financial schemes. Witnesses testified, including the fire investigators, the police officers who had made the arrest, even Thomas with his meticulous documentation. The evidence was a web that left no room to escape. When it was my turn, I stepped forward. My hands did not tremble, my voice did not falter. I told the court what had been done to me, how my own daughter had called me a burden, how she had tried to strip me of my independence, my dignity, and even my life. I spoke of the fire, of the break-in, of the threats she had whispered to me in my own home. The courtroom was silent as I spoke, every word falling with the weight of truth. Clara stared at me, her face twisting, but she could not deny what had been laid bare. When the defense tried to paint her actions as desperation, as a cry for help, the judge's face hardened. "Desperation does not excuse endangerment," she said firmly. "Desperation does not excuse betrayal." The verdict was swift. Guilty on multiple counts, Clara was sentenced to years in prison, her schemes finally collapsing into rubble. As the gavel fell, I felt no joy. Justice is never sweet. It is heavy, necessary, and solemn. I returned home that evening, the weight of the trial pressing down on me, yet beneath it all there was a quiet strength. I had stood in the light, and I had not faltered. But the reckoning was not only Clara's. Daniel still lingered in the shadows, his silence a chain around his neck. A week after the trial, he came once more, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am leaving," he said. "I cannot stay here. Every corner of this town reminds me of what we did. I need to start over, somewhere far away." I looked at him for a long moment. "Do you think running will bring you peace?" He shook his head. "No, but staying will destroy me. I do not ask for your blessing, only for your understanding." I sighed, my heart heavy. "Go then. But remember this, peace will never be found in distance. It will only be found in the choices you make next." He nodded, tears glistening, then turned and walked out. I watched him go, uncertain if our paths would ever cross again. The house was mine again, fully and undeniably. No more shadows lurking at the edges, no more whispered threats in the halls. Yet as I walked through its rooms, I felt both triumph and sorrow. Triumph that I had endured, that I had not been broken. Sorrow that the ones who should have loved me had chosen betrayal instead. One evening, I stood in the garden, the cool wind brushing against my face, and I whispered aloud, "I am not a burden. I never was." The words lingered in the air, a declaration not only to Clara and Daniel, but to the world itself. Yet even then, I knew the story was not fully finished. For every ending carries within it the seed of what comes after. Clara was behind bars, Daniel was gone, but the echoes of their choices would reverberate for years, and I, standing strong in the place they had tried to take from me, was ready to decide what came next. The reckoning had come, but the future was still mine to shape. The day Clara was led away in handcuffs, and Daniel walked out of my door for the last time, I knew my life had been torn apart and remade in a way I could never have imagined. Yet in that destruction there was also space, a clearing for something new. For the first time in years, I was not fighting to survive. I was free to decide what my future would look like. Free from the shadows of betrayal that had lingered far too long. The house felt different now. It was no longer a battlefield, no longer a prison where whispered threats and schemes echoed through the halls. It had returned to what it once was, a home. Every morning I walked through its rooms, sunlight spilling across the walls, and I felt both the pain of the past and the promise of what lay ahead. But freedom came with questions. What should I do with this house, this life that was once nearly stolen from me? Should I keep it only for myself, guarding it as a symbol of resilience, or should I use it for something greater? The answer came to me one evening as I sat in the garden, the same garden where I had whispered to the wind that I was not a burden. I realized that my story was not only my own, it belonged to countless others who had faced betrayal, dismissal, and cruelty from those they loved. My voice had been nearly silenced, but I had spoken. And now, I wanted that voice to echo for others who could not speak for themselves. I began by writing, filling page after page with my story, not just the events, but the emotions, the fear, the anger, the strength, and the resolve. I wrote for hours, sometimes through the night, my pen moving faster than my thoughts. When I finally set the pages aside, I realized I had written not only for myself, but for every mother, father, grandparent, or elder who had ever been told they were nothing more than a burden. Thomas encouraged me to publish it. "Your story has power," he said, his eyes steady with conviction. "People need to hear it. It is not just a personal victory, it is a call to others who have been silenced." With his help, I turned those pages into a manuscript, and then into a book. The first time I held the printed copy in my hands, my name across the cover, I felt a swell of pride unlike anything I had felt before. This was not just survival. This was legacy. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from strangers across the country, women and men who had faced betrayal from their own children, people who had been pushed aside, abandoned, or manipulated. They thanked me for giving voice to their pain, for showing them that survival was possible, that dignity could be reclaimed. But the book was only the beginning. I opened the doors of my home not to Clara or Daniel, but to others in need. I turned one wing of the house into a refuge for elders who had no one, a place where they could find community, warmth, and dignity. The laughter of new friends soon filled the halls, washing away the echoes of past cruelty. Every night, as I sat by the fire with them, listening to their stories, I knew I had made the right choice. My house was no longer only mine. It was a beacon, a reminder that no one deserves to be cast aside. No one deserves to be silenced by those they love. As for Daniel, I heard from him only once. A letter arrived, written in his familiar hand, the ink smudged by what I could only guess were tears. He wrote that he had started a new life in another town, working to repay his debts, trying to live differently. He did not ask for forgiveness, only for the chance to one day show me he was more than the man who had betrayed me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my journal. I did not know if our paths would cross again, but I knew this. Forgiveness was not given in a moment. It was built in choices, in actions, in time. If he chose a better path, perhaps one day I would see him not as the man who stood silent, but as the son I once knew. Clara's fate was harsher. She remained behind bars, her schemes reduced to nothing, her pride shattered. I visited her once, not out of obligation, but out of choice. She sat across from me in the visiting room, her face hard, her eyes still burning with anger. "Why are you here?" she demanded. I looked at her calmly. "Because I needed to see you one last time, to know for myself that I am free of you." She sneered, but I saw the cracks in her armor. Prison had taken from her the control she once wielded so ruthlessly. She was no longer the daughter who had tried to break me. She was simply a woman caught in the web of her own making. I stood to leave, and as I walked away, I felt no hatred, no rage, only finality. The chapter was closed, the seasons turned, and with each one, I grew stronger. My story spread further than I had ever imagined. Invitations came to speak at gatherings, to share my journey, to encourage others who had been silenced. Standing before crowds, my voice carrying through the air, I felt alive in a way I had not felt in years. I told them what I had told myself on that night in the garden. "You are not a burden. You never were." The applause that followed was not just for me, but for every soul who had ever been made to feel less than they were. As time went on, I knew that my life had taken a turn I never could have predicted. What had begun as betrayal had become resilience. What had begun as silence had become a voice. What had begun as loss had become legacy. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with shades of gold, I sat on the porch, surrounded by those who now filled my life, friends, neighbors, elders who had found refuge under my roof. We laughed, we shared stories, we watched the light fade into night. And in that moment, I realized I was not alone, not broken, not forgotten. I was whole, and though the scars of betrayal would never fully vanish, they no longer defined me. They were part of my story, but not the end of it. The end was mine to write. I picked up my journal, opened to a fresh page, and wrote the final words of this chapter of my life. They called me a burden, but I was never a burden. I was the one who carried strength, who endured, who rose again. They tried to take everything from me, but in the end, I gave myself something greater. I gave myself freedom, and now, I give the world my legacy. The ink dried on the page, and I smiled. My story was no longer about what had been done to me. It was about what I had chosen to do, and that, I knew, was the true ending.